ever have that feeling, Phil, that you just want that note to go on for eternity into the universe?
Yeah, excellent. Hell of an intro.
You like it, yeah?
Oh, yeah, I think it's fantastic. I think it's really good. I'm going to replay this about a dozen times and then a dozen more just so I can listen to the intro. It'll probably be the most exciting part of the podcast.
That's the spirit, Phil.
Oh, definitely, yeah. But yeah, great intro, great intro. Where did you find that?
Well, I've been thinking about having an intro for a while, but I didn't want to just pick some music from somewhere because I thought, well, anyone can do that. I kept it in the back of my mind, and I was talking to a friend the other day over a video conference, and he was showing me his guitar. He'd been practicing and learning it for a while. He said, "You want a demo?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So he started playing this, and it sounded kind of like Daft Punky. And I was like, I really like that. Can you just record it? I can use it for the podcast. And he's like, "Yeah, sure." So I really like the grittiness of it. And I don't normally like that type of music myself, but it just makes me want to just start like knocking things out of the park, Right. It gets me fired up to do stuff.
Yeah. It's a mile away from Shakin' Stevens, what you normally listen to,
Yeah, it's true. I know. I think I actually need to change my default music genre from the sort of 80s and early 90s to something more grungy, something to just power through what needs to be done.
Yeah. Do you listen to music when you like coding or working, when you really need to concentrate?
It depends, actually. If I need to think about something from scratch, something brand new, normally I haven't got the mental space to block out sound, and I find that the music rhythm doesn't help me at all because the ideas don't come at a set rhythm, right? My brain figures things out in the time it takes to figure it out, whether that's a second or a minute, or maybe it's like half an hour of just allowing the ideas to come so I can look at them.
Yeah.
The music doesn't help there, but once I've got the framework of what I want to do, and I've got that, like if you're writing a bit of code, say with the build system, the idea of how to build it would come to mind, and then I could sit down and say put on some Daft Punk and start, what was the one I listened to actually? Daft Punk. It was Random Access Memories. And I actually heard about it on Radio 4 a while ago. The guy behind Google's AI, I think is it DeepMind? Google's AI? I might have that wrong. I don't know. I think it's that. And he was being interviewed on Radio 4 a while ago, and he said that he was listening to that as he was writing the documentation and his PhD thesis and things like that to Daft Punk. And I was thinking, let me have a listen. And I listened to it. And I was like, yeah, there's something about once you've got what you need to talk about in your mind, or you need to write down or get out there, you can put some like particular rhythms behind it to help you sort of get through it and bring it out. But if it's brand new sort of blue sky thinking, I can't do it. I need complete peace.
More or less the opposite to me. I listen to lots of music while I'm doing things, but it helps me concentrate, and I find the silence, something needs to break the silence. A lot of time people need silence, like in libraries and exams and things like that. They need silence to concentrate. I don't mind.
Does it not depend on what type of music, though?
Yes, definitely.
Would Rick Astley, for example, be conducive to your output? I mean, we're never going to give you up, never going to let you down, never going to desert you. Would that encourage you to produce?
when we first started talking, I made just one stipulation, and that was that you were never, ever to mention my... I'm not going to call it an addiction, right? Because it's not. I've got it under control. But what's wrong with Rick Astley? You said you were never going to talk about this, and now the whole world knows about it.
I think there's nothing wrong with Rick Astley. He's got some good tunes, and he's still there. Yeah. He's working on Magic Radio, Rick Astley, and apparently he put together one of my best friend's shed up north.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
That's my claim to fame. Yeah. Quite indirect, I've got to say, but
Rick Astley, good singer. Don't especially like his music, but he's a good singer.
I think, my youngest daughter said to me the other day, I was trying to get them interested in Knight Rider because she likes the Knight Rider car, because I've got one of these really Kit. I've got one of I have quite a detailed model of that car from my kid, and I kept it. And of course, the kids got hold of it, and then the windscreen came out, and it wasn't quite as indestructible as the on-screen version, but it still works. And I tried to get them to watch the Knight Rider show, and they just said it's really, really boring, and it's just about a stupid car. I'm like, well, yeah, that's the whole point. So then I played them the introduction music, trying to get them fired up with the Knight Rider music, and my youngest said, "This music's catchy, but I'm not watching it." So
I didn't like the Knight Rider music.
Didn't you?
No.
I think it was made you curious. And did you like the A-Team music? I love the A-Team music.
No, I didn't. I didn't like, out of the 80s TV shows, I think the only one that I ever liked was what's he called? Quincy MD and Magnum PI with Tom Selleck.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
Did you like Happy Days? Did you watch that?
No.
You didn't watch Happy Days with the Fonz?
No.
Everybody at school wanted to do. Well, maybe you don't, but he'd do this sort of little move, and he'd point at the jukebox, and it would just start playing, and everybody that I knew wanted that superhero Fonz move.
Ability,
Forget about flying, forget about anything. It was that move was just to put the music on. Yeah. Goes to show just how important music is, and we're back to that. You know what? Maybe we should talk about Slackware.
Slackware, yeah. I've actually got a question, Stuart. The other day, I was wanting to verify, some bash script that I was testing. I was wanting to verify what version of Slackware ARM I had installed. And of course, the 14.2 is just 14.2, but the current is 14.2 plus. And I brought the file, which is etc. Slackware dash version. And it said 14.2 plus. And I'm like, okay, I've got current. But how do I know it's an ARM system?
You need to check the output of uname.
Yeah.
You could say the same about x86-64. That doesn't have any.
So if I, on Slackware 64, if I type cat, etc. Slackware dash version, it'll just tell me Slackware 14.2 plus.
That's right. The architecture is not surfaced in that file.
Okay. And is that something that Patrick decides, or just the way it is, or?
Well, he creates the file, so you could certainly say he decides it. If you're asking, is it common in other distributions? Do they surface the architecture within that file? I don't know.
It seemed to me that if you're on Slackware 14.2, that's what it should say. But if you're on Slackware 64 14.2, that's what it should say. And if you're on Slackware ARM 14.2, that's what it should say. Obviously, the different platforms, it should be reflected in the version. And it's just an idea I thought about. It should say ARM. It should say like Slackware ARM, because it's not even the same software.
So I've just looked at other distributions, and the architecture is not surfaced in etc. Say there used to be a file called Red Hat release and some other things, but I can't find that on the system I was just looking at actually. However, on Slackware and on Red Hat in this instance, there is a file called /etc/os release, and in that you'll find that it does have pretty name equals Slackware ARM 14, Slackware 14.2 ARM in there. So that is in there, but there is no actual variable or setting in there that says exactly what the architecture is. You'd have to extract it from parsing the pretty name string. Yeah.
Okay. It's just something that crossed my mind when I was looking at the version, and I thought, you can do it with uname, you can do it by various other means and methods. I just wondered. Another question I had.
Well, on that though, I mean, if you think about it, it depends how you want to use the architecture name. If you, for example, we're going to do something with scripting, you might have a case statement that says case architecture is ARM, blah, 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 do this. If it's this, do that. Logically, you walk down and you use the architecture as the original key that takes you into a different branch of code, rather than compare it with Slackware version and an architecture at the same time, because it's easier to code it that way anyway.
Right.
At least it is to me. Maybe it's not for other uses.
Maybe other distributions do it their way, but Slackware historically has never been subject to its peers. It's always done its own thing. If it's something that Patrick could decide on, then I might annoy Patrick and ask him. And if he says, nah, bad idea, then so be it. But I think it's a good idea. I really do think it's a good idea.
You can always ask. I was thinking about that the other day, actually, in where you have, say, Slackware has user man for the man pages, and I think all the other Linux distributions have user share man, which is what is in the file system hierarchy standard, the FHS documentation. But it's quite funny because in the end, even though Slackware is slightly different and has some files in different places and things, kind of doesn't really seem to matter over a course of time. Doesn't really seem to make that much difference. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a distributor for packages, then you're going to build them on the system they're supposed to be, and you simply just follow the standards. You're going to have a different build system anyway to build a .deb, to build an RPM. So you've already got a different build tool, packaging tool anyway. So you can just follow the standards that are already there, that are set. It makes sense to have some kind of standard, but having deviations really doesn't make much difference, to be honest. At least in my experience.
Yeah. I was installing, I think it was Current the other day, and got into before the installer, initial RAM disk. Got into that, and I thought, right, the first thing I'm going to do is set the date. Now, usually what I do is type date and then month, day, hour, minute, year. Just to manually set the date, because I've usually got no network or anything. And I thought to myself, I spoke to you the other week about NTP date. I wonder if that still works. Now, there was no NTP date. So I thought, right, what about SNTP? I'll use that instead. But there wasn't that either. Now, there used to be NTP date to set the time from an NTP server. SNTP you can use in Slackware once it's all installed, but I'm thinking how do you do that from the initial RAM disk, like just before you run setup and you configure your partitions, you set your time and your date and do all that before you run setup. Unless you're doing it manually, like I usually do, how else would you do it? Could you still connect to an NTP server remotely?
I'm not sure if we're talking about two different things, or you are confusing the initial RAM disk with the installer operating system. Because the installer operating system has the NTP package in it. In fact, if you look in the installer, you'll find there's a script called QGO in root directory. There is on the ARM port, not on x86. Right. That's the script I use to start the installer and set the time. And I think actually fix the time as well. Right. Oh, and it sets the terminal window as well. So when I run the installer, I can see which machine it is that I'm installing in the terminal window. So that the installer has NTP date in it, and I assume it has NTPD because I think I put the whole package in there. Can't remember, but it's definitely got NTPD. But inside of the initial RAM disk to boot the operating system, no, that's not going to have NTP in it. It would, it doesn't make sense because I mean, it kind of would make sense in a way, but the thing is, it wouldn't. You'd have to bring because NTP relies on the network stack, so you'd have to bring the network stack up first anyway. And that's really, at that point, you've booted the OS proper. The only thing you could realistically do would be you could save the state. So if your system, if you don't have an RTC on it, you could change the operating system so that it saved a file. It saved a copy of and so then when the initial RAM disk booted back up, you could modify initrd, which it is literally it's just a shell script, to read the file off of / somewhere on the file system, and then set the date. Of course, the date would be wrong. It would be the same date as it was when your system was powered down gracefully. However, it's probably better than 1970 for some applications. And then you fix the NTP, you sync it back up when you've got network access, perhaps.
If you ran a variable comparison between what variable A is the time of last modified of the file, and variable B is, oh no, you couldn't do that, could you? Because
No, so
you wouldn't know what the time was. So
exactly. So you just read the file. You just dump out the
yeah,
epoch dates, and then
it would definitely better than 1970.
yeah, for some things it might be. If you're trying to mount file systems, at least it wouldn't complain that it's gone. Basically, it wants to force a system check.
Yeah.
But then again, you can also in the Slackware ARM installer, you've got the option to disable system checks for systems where the installer thinks it doesn't have an RTC, like the Raspberry Pi, for example. And QEMU offers you the option to disable file system checks on X2 or EXT at least file systems.
Yeah, I was just wondering because not that it matters, but there used to be NTP date used to be included, but it's not now.
No,
Certainly
it is. It is in there.
not in the current.
It is.
The command. If it is, I've deleted something.
Yeah,
Because
you
the
must have done.
because the command's not there. And now I'm going to go, after this conversation, I'm going to go and try it again and find out it is there and make myself look really stupid.
It's one way to do it.
You know how it is when you say, no, Stuart, I'm certain.
I know it's in there
certain.
because my script uses it, and I'm going to actually reinstall my machine.
I can imagine in 20 minutes' time I'll be holding my head in my hands thinking, oh God, what a fool I am. But I've been really busy for the past sort of 2 weeks. I've been rebuilding the SARPi build engine.
Oh yeah.
Now, I got it into it was an alpha state where I know the core, I know what the core does, I know what it's supposed to do, and that's easy to work with because I've been working with it for years. The problem was restructuring everything so that it didn't take 5 hours. You know, when you change one variable, you've got to go through umpteen scripts and change the same variable. And I'm thinking I need a method of doing it that's going to be easy maintainable. So
yeah, you said your friend Al, didn't you? He was recommending including a shell script. Yeah, that's what I do. It's the easiest way.
What I didn't agree with, he said, and make a functions file. And put all your functions in it. Now, I don't know. I've seen your work. I've been reading your work for years. But the difference, say, between something you'd do and what I do is I'm lazy and I put the function right before I need it. So I'll write the function and then I'll use it. So, you know, it gets really bad if you've got a lot of functions. So I thought, okay, let's do a functions file. And it's just completely transformed the whole, everything about it. Because I found, for instance, I might have had 4 or 5 or more variables doing the same thing, given the same information, or setting the same parameters. So I was able to sort of narrow down the amount of variables that I used. I ended up with just over a third of the complete number of variables that were used in the whole process. If it was 100, then I've ended up with 30. So much easier to manage.
How are you doing that though? Is that because you just say used a different variable name for every for loop or something?
Because picture this: you've got 5 scripts now. 4 of them are subscripts that run off the main script. So you run the main script, and the main script calls the other 4 in order, in the order that you specify. Each script could run by itself if you didn't run the main script. You say kernel and modules.
Okay.
If you just wanted to do the kernel and modules, you could just run that script. So they were self-contained in that respect, and that's what made them messy. So you can imagine if I wanted to change one variable in one part of one script, and I have to follow that through with all the other scripts as well. So yeah, using the source variable file, that was the list from which everything else got its values. It's turned out to be really, really efficient. Now when I make a change, it's just one change in one file. It filters through the rest of the scripts. Got a whole logging process going on as well. Logs the entire shell output. There's two logs actually. One's a build log, so it just logs the packages, the timestamp of the packages, the Git version that was used, etc. And the other log is a complete log of everything that happened, errors, warts and all. And to save time, I mean, after you've been coding for hours and hours and hours, and you think of the amount of time you spend typing, Al came up with this idea. He said, what you need to do is build a tool with options. And I said, why? And he said, well, if you're typing out a command and it takes you 30 seconds to type the command, add that 30 seconds up 20 times, 10 minutes. If you had a tool and all you did is type the tool and then the command option, bang, there it is. It's a few seconds of a job, saves time.
Yeah.
So I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. So he showed me the framework of what he's got in mind, and I thought, yeah, this is a good idea. I can build on this. So I actually made like a CLI tool out of it, and then I got ideas out of beyond my station, and I thought, hey, we can do this tool in like a dialog menu. So I converted everything that the CLI tool did into a TUI, a text user interface tool, that does exactly the same job but using dialogues. And you've seen them a million times, Stuart, but it's just cool when you can start off with a blank editor and end up with something usable like that.
Yeah, you're creating something.
Yeah, I mean,
and you can actually keep tuning it. That's the part of the joy of doing it.
I cheated and I looked in some of the Slackware main scripts to see how Patrick was doing his dialogues, and I thought, there's secrets in here. So after about 5 minutes of looking at those, I thought, I know what I'm doing here. I read the finer details on like menu boxes and info boxes and things like that on Google, but the main structure of how to do it and how to arrange it, I got from the build scripts.
If you go into the PKG tools source directory in the A series, and if you unpack the dialog source archive, you will find in there there's about 50 or so shell script examples showing you various invocations. So, but those scripts, because they're quite large, I guess, they're not in the package tools, or rather, they're not in the dialog package itself. So they're not going to be in UserDog.
Yeah.
So UserDog. They're not going to be in UserDog dialog. But if you unpack the source, you'll find that's where I usually go actually when I want to try and do something new.
I'll definitely have a look at that. That's great. Thanks.
When you want to do something slightly complex, it requires quite a bit of thought about how to try and dynamically create the menu options and stuff like that. So I've got a few scripts myself where I've done that actually. If you kind of get stuck, there's some really stuff you can end up doing.
What I wanted to do, for instance, in one of these tools, it gives you the ability to clean the kernel source. You've cloned it from Git, you've pre-compiled it, you've built with it. It's in a bit of a messy state, and you think, hang on a minute, I want to start over. So this tool, I've given it the M option. So you type out the name of the script, -M, and then it pops up and it says, this will make, clean and prepare the kernel source. Are you sure you want to do this? Then it gives you a yes or no box. In doing that, I learned that you've got to deal with the no first. I spent about an hour, maybe two, working out why it wasn't accepting me pressing the yes button. And then I found out when it was trial and error all the way. I found out by dealing with no first and then dealing with yes, that's how I had to do it. Because dealing with yes first, it still dealt with no even after I'd dealt with yes, if that makes sense. So if I said, yes, I want to make, clean and prepare the kernel source, it would do that, and then it would exit the tool because no told it to quit.
Okay.
So I had to say, if it was no, do nothing, but if it was yes, do this, rather than the other way around.
Okay. I'm not really following why though, because I think dialog has an exit code which you can access through the $?
Yeah.
So now, you just match on that.
I played with that as well. I'm going to have to do a lot more investigating on exit codes in order to understand and use them successfully, because the exit codes that I was testing with, it came out with the same results no matter whether the previous command returned 1 or 0. It was still coming out
Ah,
0.
right. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward. For example, I've just got a dialog script here that I use to select which Slackware ARM trees to polish up and push out. So it just
Yeah,
automatically populates the list of available trees. It takes the content of the dollar question mark, which is the exit code of what was
yeah,
previously executed. Then it populates a variable with that. And then it's got a case statement. Yeah, so 0 is where it does all the polishing and it then pushes out. And then exit value 1 is where it polishes the tree, but it doesn't push out to the FTP service, the
right.
mirror service. And then 255 means that somebody pressed escape or there's some
Yeah,
unknown exit
yeah.
code. That's all it does. I'll paste it into the chat for you, actually. You can see because it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I do use exit codes for certain things. Like when you want to exit with a specific code and you go like exit 33 or something,
Yeah.
and then you pick up that exit code on the next comparison or whatever you're doing with it.
Well, the exit code in Bash, you need to capture it immediately after
Yeah,
that thing
yeah,
terminates. Otherwise, it's going to be 0 after
yeah.
that. It'll just reset.
So you can
So
like exit 33 and then if dollar question mark equals 33, then do something.
yeah, and you
Uh,
can also do that from functions. So you can, in functions, you don't write exit, you put returns. So you can return an exit code
yeah,
via the return, and you can match on the exit code subsequent to calling that function. In other words, you call the function as if it was some external tool.
right. Really interesting doing the dialogues. So simple, yet in code, I mean, it's not elaborate code. It's very simple code, but the effects are so visually impressive. And I'm saying this after using Slackware dialogues for like almost 20 years, but when you make it yourself, it's different. You understand what you've done to make it work. And after seeing Patrick's code, I'm thinking, yeah, this is really cool. This is, I can do this. This is great. So dialogues have the place. I'm not especially a great fan of them. I did this dialogue tool just for the laugh, really, just as an alternative to the CLI tool. But
I think it depends what you're using it for. I like dialogue tools and I like command line and I like UIs. It completely depends on what the use
yeah,
case is. Like
yeah,
you use the best tool for the job. So in my case, for example, today I'm going to push out Slackware ARM current, but there's no updates for 14.2. My script presents a list of the Slackware ARM trees that are currently maintained, and then I manually go and press the spacebar. I go and select the ones that I want to polish up and push out to the mirrors. I don't ever have to look at what the list of maintained trees is. My
yeah,
script just tells me, and I decide which one I want to push out. And that's far easier than going to a script and then giving it some command line options. Oh, I want this one, I want that one, because that's just work. You'll probably find at some point as well, even as you've created the tools with the command line options, that with the build system, I always did 3 passes. So I type R2B-P3 for P for passes. And then I thought, why am I doing that? Why don't I just set the default as 3 and anything else
yeah,
is what I give it? So the default is now 3. So I just need to type R2B. The more that you work and you go, oh, yeah, this is what I'm actually doing. You just code around what you're actually manually doing. That's one of the really nice parts about being able to have a level of scripting or programming ability, even if it's in a basic sort of language or system language like Shell. But Shell is very different from, say, BASIC, because as root, you can do whatever you like. It is a system control language. You've got access to the tools that controls this system.
yeah.
So to be able to have that level of skill to be able to write scripts that allow you to really take control of that system, to me, is really refreshing. And that's why I really love Shell, because you can do so much with it. It's incredibly slow, of course. There are things you can do to try and speed it up, but one of
Use
the
Slackware for one.
well,
I have.
it's
I
not going to
can't
make it.
agree. I can't agree that Bash is slow.
It's not necessarily that it's Bash that's slow. It's the way that when you start execing
Yeah,
external tools,
yeah,
then it becomes slow because it has to fork a copy of Bash and then it has to exec the binary over
yeah.
the top of it.
Ah, right.
So that's why in package tools, ARM carried a patch for years that translated the doinst scripts so that they ran bash natively, because the doinst scripts, as they're written, they actually open a subshell and then they cd into a directory and then they
right.
run ln to make symlinks.
Yeah.
And that execing on ARM was unbearably slow, even at the beginning. So my friend Jim, he wrote some sed inside of package tools to just switch all that stuff into bash native code, and it got a lot faster. And that's what's been in Slackware for a long time. But you couldn't really notice it on x86. It was just on ARM how slow it was. It was slow anyway with the disk access, and just that kind of thing just compounded it. And if you've got it installing a package with potentially hundreds of symlinks, it was noticeably slow. So there are lots of things like that, but there also are a number of workarounds that you can do. But sometimes then you should just program in different language. But the good thing about shell is that anybody who learns Unix, particularly in the old days where people used IRIX and Sonos and things like that, even just general users would know Unix commands. They wouldn't be a Unix admin ever, but they knew how to do what they did with the command line. And so it really means that a lot of people can learn Unix quite easily by, and get control of it by looking at shell. That's why I really like shell, actually. It's so universal. It allows you to do a lot. You can go really quite far with it, actually.
In my ignorance, I'll have to say ignorance, I can't imagine Slackware, especially Slackware ARM, without banging in shell commands, building shell scripts. I've never done anything else. It's what I love to do. It's very versatile. You can do a hell of a lot with it. Can't ever imagine using Slackware without a terminal or any brand of Linux.
No, same here. I mean, even on my Mac, I always have a terminal open. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I'm always in the terminal. It's just easier for me to use it that way.
It might sound strange, but I don't feel comfortable without the terminal open, because I know if anything happens that I'm not expecting or something needs attention, I go straight to the terminal and sudo up as root, and then fix whatever.
You do what? You sudo?
Yeah,
if
you're in Ubuntu or something,
Ubuntu.
Whatever. And because I never use Ubuntu, I always use Ubuntu on the desktop. I watch most of my Formula One. I watch on Ubuntu in Google Chrome. And so that's how dirty my hands are, Stuart. But even then, when I've got Google Chrome open and I'm watching whatever, the terminal's sat there. It might be there for no reason, but it's there. In Slackware, I don't have that problem because I'm always on the command line. I feel a lot more comfortable with the terminal window open when I'm on a Linux desktop.
Yeah. I always have them open. It's just part of how I use an operating system. I always expect to be able to do things by hand, because it's often easier than trying to click through and all sorts of stuff.
I've actually started to build for the Raspberry Pi 1 again on kernel 5.4.
Okay.
Mainly because in the stats for the SARPi website, there used to be a league table of competition between the different Raspberry Pi versions, and Raspberry Pi 3 was always top, but Raspberry Pi 1 was very close behind it, and that's slipped down to levels that I'm not happy with. So there's a lot of Raspberry Pi 1 users that aren't getting support that they should be and could be.
Are you saying that there's quite a lot of people still using a Raspberry Pi 1?
Well, there used to be, and I'm going back, say, 5-6 months. There used to be maybe about 10-12 gigabytes of downloads for Raspberry Pi 1 per month, and now there's like less than 2.
Okay.
So I'm thinking start to build installers and packages for the Raspberry Pi 1 again, just until Slackware 15 is released. So yeah, I'm going to start doing that.
But why though, if the usage has gone down?
If in 2 or 3 months' time people are still not downloading and using it, then it will be an indicator that it's a bit of a waste of time, because it does take over 24 hours to run a full build on the Raspberry Pi 1. Right. So I don't want to invest that kind of time and effort in doing it, because it's always behind everything else.
We've talked about this before though, but that depends on ultimately just whether you want to do it or not, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you're doing it for, you could
Well,
either just stop doing it and see if anyone asks you for it. But if they ask you for it, you're still going to be in a decision mode of whether you have to do it, whether you're going to do it or you're not. So, you know what I mean?
Put it this way. I put out a post on LQ yesterday saying, okay, I'm going to start doing Slackware 14.2 for the Raspberry Pi 1 again, blah, blah, blah. And within a few hours, somebody had replied and said, oh, great, now I can use my Raspberry Pi 1 again. And yeah, that just about told me that I was doing the right thing. You know, because if one person says that, then other people will feel the same.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I don't know when 14.2 will be EOL'd. Depends on when 15 is. I know there's some movement going towards it, but
Yeah. Well, like we always say, all in good time. When it's ready, it'll be ready. Can't rush it.
Yeah, it's not that straightforward either. I don't know if you remember or heard of what's the guy that runs Canonical, Ubuntu, that creates Ubuntu? I've forgotten his name now.
I don't know. I had Shakin' Stevens in my head with like
He's definitely not Shakin' Stevens.
a pink teddy boy jacket on and Beetle Crushers. When you said what's his name, I thought of Shakin' Stevens, but
Mark Shuttleworth, right? Yes, Mark Shuttleworth. That's
right.
his name. It's definitely not Shakin' Stevens.
Yeah.
But I remember in the community years ago, actually it was quite a long time ago, where he was, for all intents and purposes, it appeared that he wanted the developers of the main components of the Ubuntu Linux operating system to kind of line up with the schedule that he had around when he wanted to publish Ubuntu releases. So, if he sets a schedule, everyone falls in line, and that makes it really easy for them.
Yeah.
At least, I'm not sure if it was really put like that, but that's the impression that quite a few of the developers had when that was proposed. But that goes to show that that is a real thing. That is a real challenge because, for example, when you make a release, you want to maintain it for at least a few years. And in order to do that, one of the critical components of it is the kernel, because it has a lot of security updates and all that sort of stuff. So you need to tie your release to a particular branch, stable long-term release of the kernel, because as a vendor, it's really difficult to upgrade to a newer kernel release because loads of things can change. You may need to recompile. I remember Red Hat did it years ago. They rebased the kernel in one of the earlier versions, and it was a big change. I mean, you can do it in current because you're changing lots of things anyway.
Yeah.
You recompile things as you move forwards. But on a stable release, if you have a third-party kernel module, for example, it may only work with a certain kernel release. It may have only been tested. It may even only compile against a certain older release. So there's lots of third and fourth party dependencies around that you have to be cognizant of when you put a stake in the ground and make a release of an operating system, and one of which is a kernel. The other things like KDE and various other big ticket items.
Yeah.
So you want to attach yourself to a long-term stable release of the main things that are going to basically cause you a pain. Put in a post-release, right? There would be a lot of moving parts if you were to change them. Mark Shuttleworth's request highlighted that, he brought that to the surface. So that's also another reason why you can't just make a release as Slackware, or you have to kind of wait till things align and then you start to push forwards. That's been my experience.
One last thing. Because I'm building kernel 5.4 for the Raspberry Pi 1, and that is obviously Slackware 14.2, the official kernel is 4.19 or is it 4.4 still on Slackware 14.2? I'm going to need a kernel headers package.
I think it's 4.4.
Is it 4.4? In any event, I'm going to need a kernel headers package at some point. I can imagine it being a problem if I don't have one.
I'd need to check actually. It might only be that you need the kernel package for which glibc was compiled against, which is not changing. So you might not need to actually supply a new kernel package, but a kernel headers package. I'm not, don't quote me on that anymore, because when I do a kernel upgrade, I usually upgrade, if it's a major release kernel upgrade, I upgrade glibc anyway, but you don't have to. So it might be that you could supply a new kernel headers package and everything will be fine. I'm not actually sure anymore. I saw it documented years ago, but it was so old that it may not even be the case anymore anyway.
I'll try and do some reading into that
Mm,
a bit more. It's just something that I thought I'd ask you on the back of what
mm.
we've already spoke about. Great stuff, Stuart. Thanks.
All right, cheers, Phil. Take
Yeah,
care. Let's rock it. Bow.
yeah. It reminds me of like ZZ Top.
Yeah, it makes me want to get the I told my friend, I said it makes me want to just grow really long hair, like all the way down to my bum, and just start shaking my head and like doing crazy stuff.
It's like ZZ Top, or it could be Metallica.
Yeah,
It's that bluesy kind of,
ZZ Top. Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's that bluesy kind of overdriven guitar, and you don't know where it's going. It could be White Snake. Well, no.
There is a second part, actually. I
Oh,
do know where it goes. It's a bit different from that part. So it's actually going to be a tune itself. He decided he's got a friend and he's working with him and they're sharing,
right.
file sharing the recordings and he's
Yeah.
mixing it together and things. I can dig out the second part if you like. Right, cheers, Phil.
Bye for now.